You are going to die. You know this. You have always known this. And the knowing is so constant, so woven into the background of every decision you make, every relationship you build, every morning you wake up and choose to do something with the day, that most of the time you simply do not think about it, but it is there. And here's the thing that makes humans unique among every species that has ever lived on this planet. We are the only animal that knows it is going to die before it happens. A deer does not lie awake at night aware of its own mortality. A crow will mourn a dead crow, will sit beside the body and call out, but it does not spend its days living inside the knowledge that one day it will be the body on the ground. Only humans do this. Only humans carry the future fact of their own death as a constant companion through every year of their lives. Psychologists call this mortality salience. The awareness of death is not a background hum. It is a cognitive force that shapes behavior, drives decision-making, and has been shaping the human mind for at least 300,000 years. And the question that archaeologists, anthropologists, and evolutionary biologists have been asking for over a century is this: what did the first humans do with that knowledge? Not the first humans who had religion, not the first humans who had language or agriculture or cities. The first humans, the ones who had none of those things, the ones who had fire and stone tools and each other, and the awareness that one day everyone they knew would be gone. What did they do when someone died? The answer is not what you might expect, and it tells us something profound about what it means to be human. The oldest evidence of intentional burial dates to approximately 300,000 years ago. In a cave system in South Africa called Rising Star, deep inside a chamber so inaccessible that it required excavators to crawl through passages barely wide enough for a human body, researchers found something that should not have been there. Bones, arranged, deliberately placed in a remote chamber that served no obvious practical purpose. No food storage, no shelter, no tool making. Just bones in the dark. At the end of a passage no one would have any reason to enter. The species was Homo naledi, a small-brained hominin that predates modern humans. And the implication, which remains intensely debated among paleoanthropologists, is that Homo naledi was deliberately placing its dead in this chamber, not eating them, not abandoning them where death occurred, carrying them through that narrow, lightless passage and leaving them there. If confirmed, this would push intentional funerary behavior back further than any evidence previously suggested. It would mean that the impulse to do something specific with the dead, to mark death as different from any other event, to give it a place and a ritual, is not a product of modern human cognition. It may be something older, something that predates language, predates complex social structure, predates almost everything we typically associate with civilization. Then, 60,000 years ago, at Shanidar Cave in northern Iraq, a Neanderthal was buried on his side in a deliberate position. Around his bones, researchers found concentrated pollen clusters from 8 different flowering plant species. Evidence, debated but persistent across decades of analysis, that someone placed flowers on that body before covering it with earth. Think carefully about what that gesture requires. To place flowers on a grave, you have to believe that the act means something. You have to have, somewhere inside your cognitive architecture, a model of death in which the dead person is still somehow present, or at least in which the living person's relationship to them has not simply ended. You have to feel that the gesture can reach something. That is not instinct. That is not survival behavior. That is grief given a form. Grief is not unique to humans. Elephants return to the bones of their dead and touch them with their trunks, sometimes for hours, sometimes years after the death occurred. Chimpanzees have been observed carrying dead infants for days, sometimes weeks, refusing to put them down. Dolphins have been documented supporting the bodies of dead calves at the water's surface. Crows gather around dead crows in what researchers describe as apparent mourning behavior. Something like grief exists in the animal kingdom. The attachment does not end immediately at death. There's a biological residue of relationship that persists beyond the moment of loss. But what humans do with grief is categorically different. Humans ritualize it. Every human culture ever studied, without a single exception across thousands of documented societies, has formal practices for handling the dead: burial, cremation, exposure, preservation. The specifics vary enormously, but the fact of ritual, the fact that death is treated as an event requiring a specific culturally prescribed response, is universal. This universality is data. When something appears in every human culture, across every geography and every era of recorded history, it is not a coincidence or a cultural invention that spread. It is a feature of the species. It is something the human mind generates inevitably under the conditions of being human. The question is why? Anthropologist Thomas Suddendorf at the University of Queensland argues that the key is what he calls mental time travel, the human ability to project the self backward into the past and forward into the future. We can imagine ourselves at other times. We can remember our own past selves and anticipate our own future selves as a continuous identity. This capacity is what makes human planning, human storytelling, and human civilization possible. It is also what makes human death uniquely devastating, because when someone you love dies, you do not only lose them in the present, you lose every future moment you had already begun to construct with them in your mind. You lose a version of your own future self, the one who is going to grow old alongside them. The grief is not just for what is gone, it is for what was never going to happen. And ritual, the formal, structured, culturally prescribed response to death, is how humans have always managed that particular weight. It gives the grief a container. It gives the loss a shape. It transforms the chaos of absence into something that can be held and named and shared with other people who are also holding it. Ancient humans did not only bury their dead, they equipped them. At sites across Europe, Asia, and Africa, archaeologists have found burials that include objects, tools, weapons, food, ornaments, pigments. A burial in Sungir, Russia, dating to approximately 34,000 years ago, contained the remains of two adolescents buried head to head, covered in thousands of ivory beads that had been painstakingly carved and sewn onto their clothing. The beads alone would have required an estimated 10,000 hours of labor to produce. You do not spend 10,000 hours making beads for someone who is simply gone. You do it because you believe they are going somewhere. The grave goods found in ancient burials across the archaeological record tell a consistent story. Ancient humans believed that death was a transition, not an ending, that the dead person would continue in some form, in some place, and would need what the living needed: food, tools, status markers, companionship. This belief is not documented in any written record from this period, and writing would not exist for tens of thousands of years, but it is documented in the material culture, in the choices people made about what to put in the ground with someone they had lost, in the evidence of ochre, the red pigment that appears in burials across multiple continents, used to paint the bones of the dead in a color that may have symbolized blood and life and the possibility of return. In Shanidar Cave in Israel, burials dating to 100,000 years ago show deliberate use of ochre on the remains. In La Ferracie, in France, Neanderthal burials show evidence of careful body placement and possible grave goods. In Sungir, the labor investment in funerary preparation suggests a community that organized significant collective resources around the act of sending their dead into whatever came next. The evidence converges on a single conclusion: for as long as there have been humans capable of knowing they would die, there have been humans who believed that death was not the last thing. So what does this tell us? It tells us that the human response to death, ritual, belief in continuation, the investment of labor and meaning in the act of burial, is not something that was taught. It was not passed down from a specific culture or invented by a specific religion. It emerged independently and repeatedly in populations separated by thousands of miles and tens of thousands of years. It tells us that the human brain, when confronted with the death of someone it loves, does not accept the ending. It cannot. The same cognitive architecture that makes us capable of love, the capacity to form deep attachment, to model another person's inner life, to construct a shared future, makes the permanent absence of that person cognitively intolerable. Ritual is not superstition. It is not primitive confusion about the nature of reality. It is a technology, one of the oldest human technologies, for managing the one experience that every person who has ever lived has had to face, the moment when someone who was there is no longer there. The flowers at Shanidar, the ivory beads at Sungir, the ochre on the bones at Kafse, the painted chambers at Lascaux where the animals still run across the walls in the dark. These are not the artifacts of primitive minds that did not know better. They are the artifacts of minds exactly like yours, minds that loved people and lost them and needed to do something with that loss that was larger than simply walking away. The first humans dealt with death the same way you do. They made it mean something. And 300,000 years later, we are still doing it because the loss is still the same and the need to give it a shape, to say that it matters, that the person mattered, that the absence is not nothing, that need has not changed at all.